Miss Kathleen Patton.
Welcome. So happy to be here. Yeah, I think everyone's had that experience at least once where you don't want to admit you don't know, or you get upset that people are even questioning if you know it, or...
There is more to education than just getting information and retaining it and implementation. It's also about interaction.
So I'll talk about my favorite holiday.
Sure.
Which is Thanksgiving. And it is in November. And when I was here, some of my students were really generous and we celebrated a little bit together.
And there's actually a quote that goes, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you should probably change the room.
Right.
Or the people in the room.
Yes.
If you need music to stay motivated, then what are you going to do when the music is gone?
Going to the old city is always incredible. No matter how many times you've been there, for me, it's a place that I go and you just feel at peace. It's so beautiful.
What are some strengths and weaknesses of our local education you've noticed?
As a pedestrian, you always feel like your life is on the line.
Or test anything like TOEFL or IELTS?
The question I always get is, aren't you bored? What else would you do?
Yeah.
I do lots of things. And
that mentality of staying cool, composed in high intensity situations, high stakes situations. Hey folks, hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Astra Muse. And I'm your host, Muhammad Ali here. Today I got a very special guest in the house, and that's Miss Kathleen Patton. Miss Kathleen, thanks for coming on the show today.
You are welcome. So happy to be here.
Yeah. You know what? Our students kept asking, when are you going to have this teacher on the show? Because some of your students come here and take our program, so they've been dying to see you on the show. Two of us sitting down and talking. So we're finally making this happen.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited.
Me too. And so before we move on, huge shout out to my students who are some of the best in Bukhara, and thank you for getting me here. Yeah.
All right, let's kick off this podcast. And I actually want to start off with a little background, the story about our meetup. So before this podcast, we had a little chat over some coffee, and something really weird happened that day. We probably didn't notice it. So that day, it was I was having coffee for the first time in 5 months.
Okay.
I was on the so-called caffeine restriction. I was not allowed to drink any caffeine, so I wanted to do something bold that day, and I went for it. But guess what happened? After my third sip, I kind of got stiff, and I felt like I was choking. I don't know if you could tell, but I was in a little bit of, I was kind of a critical situation.
I will say the one thing I noticed, I was like, he's not as talkative as I thought he might be for being a podcast host. But that helps to explain it a little bit. So
yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it was fun meeting you. Now finally we get to sit down and talk.
Yes.
So let's start off with your background. Can you tell our audience a little about yourself, what you do at the moment?
Sure. So currently I am what they call an English language fellow at Bukhara State University. It's a program with the U.S. Department of State where they send English language professionals all over the world. And so I applied for this program right around a year ago and got placed here without knowing much about Uzbekistan at all. And for me, it was just a great opportunity to go somewhere new and different. And so that's basically why I'm here. Prior to that, I was working in Washington, D.C. as what they call an instructional coach, which is someone who helps teachers to develop. And so I was doing that for 5 years. And then prior to that, all of my professional life was in language teaching, both English and Spanish. So just a brief professional history.
Yeah. A cool question. So out of this curiosity, what got you into teaching?
Oh, that's a good question. Unlike many people in the US especially, I always knew that I wanted to teach. I think as a kid, I always loved school, loved my teachers, and thought, oh, like someday I should be a teacher. But what really solidified for me was when I was in high school, I actually had the opportunity. It was an incredible opportunity. It was my first time leaving the country, and I went with a volunteer group to teach English in China. Yeah, it was really incredible. And that trip taught me, number one, that I did actually enjoy teaching. Because sometimes if you don't actually do it, you have an idea of what teaching is, which is why a lot of people think they want to be teachers, and then they get into the classroom and they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it would be. So I was really fortunate to have that first experience where I was like, oh, I do enjoy teaching. I enjoy language teaching. And then as my first time abroad, I also learned how much I enjoyed being with people who were different and in places that were new and different. And so that's how I ended up going into language education, because I knew I wanted a career where I could connect with different people.
I see. So as someone who's taught students who speak different languages, how does teaching a native student, a student who speaks English, compare to teaching a non-native student? So what are some challenges you face in the classroom when, say, dealing with non-native speakers?
Yeah, I think it's a whole different perspective on the class and the teacher. And so when I've worked with native speakers, it's when I was teaching Spanish. So I've never taught English to English speakers, if that makes sense. And with them, it's like you have this underlying cultural connection. It's just a different type of connection with those students. And again, so your approach is a little different. And in that situation, when you're teaching Spanish in the United States, you're teaching it kind of for fun, in a sense. Like, these students are in school, they have to take a language, so your entire purpose and perspective on what you are doing is different. Whereas when I've worked with people from other countries, they're typically learning English, especially in the United States, because they need it to survive, they need it to go to school, they need it for work. And so your purpose in teaching feels so real. You feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't teach this well, this person's not going to do well at their job, or they're not going to succeed in their class. So it's just, again, a whole different purpose and perspective on what you're teaching, and a little bit of how you're teaching it as well, because you feel, like I said, like they need to know this now. They're going to walk out the door and go back to their job tomorrow. And, you want to make sure that they feel capable of using the language.
So what you're saying is most non-native speakers learn a foreign language out of necessity. So wouldn't you say, in that sense, non-native speakers are more driven to learn a language because they need it? Like you said, it's important for their future success, as opposed to, say, other learners who might be doing it just for the sake of it.
Yeah, I would say that's a very general, it's a generalization that I think does apply in a lot of situations. You, of course, I had American students who did love foreign languages and had that intrinsic motivation. So you find, anomalies on both sides. But yes, I think that sense of, oh my gosh, like my life is depending a bit on this language, so I'm naturally going to be motivated, is very true.
And which one of these two sources of motivation would you say is stronger, intrinsic or extrinsic? Or maybe you need a bit of both, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. That's a really good question. And I don't know, I think you do I think you need the right combination of both, because you might have people, again, this is just kind of an assumption, who move to the US, know that if they learn English, their life could vastly improve, but maybe they're getting along without it and they're making it work and they're okay with where they are. Whereas if they had also that mix of intrinsic motivation, like, oh, there's something bigger or better I want, I'm a little more motivated to learn it as well.
Yeah.
So,
and here's my take on it. I feel like you got to be able to strike a balance between both, because if you have little too much of one, say extrinsic motivation, you always have this sense of urgency that something has to be done, so you kind of stressed out. And I feel like same goes for intrinsic motivation. So if you're always doing something out of passion, and sometimes the passion is not there, so you're not that driven to show up to class every day. So this is where extrinsic motivation, I feel like, comes in. Yeah. So those students who can, use these both tools to fuel themselves to keep going are the ones who tend to be more successful than those who just rely on one.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you even think about students who complete their work just because their teacher tells them to, or there's that external motivation of, I just have to get this done to pass the class, that's not enough, so I agree. It's that right mix so you can have the right type of motivation kick in when it needs to, when you're like too tired to do it, but you're like, oh, it's due tomorrow, so I should do it, that type of thing.
Yeah, right. And what are some valuable lessons you learned along the way as a teacher? Say, if you were to give some advice to future teachers, what would be your top tips?
Yeah, that's number one, and I hope that my current students see this, is you are always learning yourself. Like, be a continual learner. Especially as a teacher, you never will know everything. You never will have all the right answers. And so the classroom is a great space to learn together. So definitely always be open to even learning. I learned so much from my students. And the other thing I would say is every student has capacity to learn, and every student has something that motivates them. Every student, like we were just saying, there is an intrinsic motivation for something inside of everyone. And I think as a teacher, we're in a unique position to try to see that capacity in our students. And when we don't see it, I think it's our job to find it, or to figure out what does motivate the student, or what is the best way that they learn, so that we can see that capacity that each student has, because just because we can't see it right away doesn't mean it's not there. And I think that's a really helpful perspective to have as a teacher. It's really easy to rule students out, to call them lazy or whatever, but from what I've learned and seen, everyone is capable.
I could not agree more with these points. I want to follow up on your first suggestion that we are all learners, even if our title says we're teachers. In some sense, we are all here to learn, and that it's okay not to know everything, because that's not what being a teacher means. I feel like what being a teacher really means is we are some kind of messengers. So our job is to pass knowledge from one generation or from one book or instructor to another one, and that we should not feel inadequate when we don't know something, because we're not Google or encyclopedia. So but at the same time, we should not get too complacent about our incompetence. So if there's something we don't know, we should seek out answers, be willing to learn as much as our students in the classroom. So this is one message we hammer home here at the school to all teachers. It's okay if you don't know something, but what's not okay is when you let that incompetence, like insecurity, kind of get the better of you, make you kind of an aggressive teacher. Because I know sometimes teachers, when they don't know something, they kind of project that on other teachers. I'm not sure if you can relate to that experience, to what I'm saying here, rather than embracing the fact that they may not know everything, and that it's okay not to know, not to have all the answers.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's had that experience at least once where you don't want to admit you don't know, or you get upset that people are even questioning if you know it, or especially in any like social environment, you don't want to be the person that has to admit they don't know. No one likes that feeling. But something I've learned is when you get comfortable with that, there's so much power in being vulnerable and saying that you don't know. And in fact, a lot of the best teachers and leaders as well have become that way because they're the first to be able to admit, I don't know. Why don't you tell me? You know, and that just opens up so many doors to learning. And also it lets, and especially as a teacher, it lets your students know that it's okay that they don't know everything. They shouldn't, you know, and it's okay not to know an answer, so that you can go through that learning process and, like you said, be like, okay, I don't know this, but I would like to learn it. Or can someone help me learn it? Or how do I learn it?
Yeah. This is something I'd love to see in more teachers. But I feel like it takes more maturity to come to this realization, because when we're young, we try not to. We think that it's not okay not to know everything, so we try to hide those insecurities, and not realizing that they just grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, but only once you grow older, you realize that it's okay not to have all the answers.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it'd be nice if people learn those lessons early. And again, why as teachers we should model that, you know, so students can say, like, you know what, it's okay that I don't know everything, you know, feel a little more comfortable with that. But yes, I agree. It's a hard lesson to learn, certainly.
Sure. Now, what do you say we talk a little about life in the U.S.?
All right.
So we'd love to know more about your culture. So what is it like living in the U.S.?
I mean, that's a very broad question. Is there any particular angle?
We can talk a little about culture there, food, and what people do in their free time.
Sure. I mean, I can really only talk about where I've lived, which is I've lived in Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C., which are both places on the East Coast. So, you know, like any country, the way that life is lived there is actually vastly different from if you go to California, you know, on the West Coast.
And that's what's fascinating about the U.S. You got all these 50 different states with their own climate, with their own culture, rules and law.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why it is hard, you know, when people ask that question, you do have to qualify it and say, like, okay, I can tell you about this particular place, because even, for example, the state of Pennsylvania, from one side to the other is like a 6-hour drive. It's a pretty large state. And where I grew up is outside of the city of Philadelphia. So you have a little more diversity, a little more development. Philadelphia is a great city. A lot of American history is there and took place there. And it wasn't until I was older and traveled to other places, even just within that state, and I realized this is a different world. This isn't where I grew up, you know, because central Pennsylvania is farmland and rolling hills and rivers, and even in terms of people's lifestyle being more conservative or liberal is different, even with that state. So yeah, it's, you know, it is such it's kind of wild how, you know, how you feel like you can be living in one country, but it feels completely different from one place to the next. So.
Yeah. So what are some cultural activities you guys usually do on holidays or special days?
Yeah. Let's see. So, one of the holidays, I'm trying to think of, what we have there that's a little different than here. So I'll talk about my favorite holiday.
Sure.
Which is Thanksgiving. And it is in November. And when I was here, some of my students were really generous and we celebrated a little bit together. But that's an American holiday where we really celebrate the freedom that we have. We celebrate the fact that, we were able to create the country that we did, and it's all about family and food. And so on that day, starting early in the morning, so the main food that people prepare is a turkey. And I don't think there are turkeys here.
It's not as popular food option as, say, beef or...
Yeah. And turkeys take hours and hours to cook. So usually there's one person in the family who's in charge of making the turkey. So they might get up super early in the morning and prep the turkey and put it in the oven. And then family comes over, and in some families, we do it sort of what we call potluck style, which is every person is assigned a different food to bring, and you all bring it to the house. Or some families who host will do all of the cooking, which means you're cooking all day long. And then, in the afternoon or evening, you have your big Thanksgiving meal. And then after that, there's usually an American football game that happens. And that's a huge day to watch American football. So one of the reasons I love it so much is, number one, I'm usually not doing all the cooking. So I just get to show up, which is really nice. Maybe I'll make something little to bring. And then it's just about spending time with family and hanging out and eating lots of food. And I don't like football, so I just get to keep hanging out. And sometimes we'll play games. Americans, one cultural note, Americans love games, like board games, social games. So usually at Thanksgiving, my family also plays games and things after dinner. So that's an example of something that's unique to the U.S.
All I can say, you guys know how to party.
Yeah.
How about traveling? You said you traveled to several countries over the years, right? So how many countries have you been to?
Maybe, I haven't counted, maybe between 10 and 15, probably.
10 or 15 countries?
Yeah, I always preface this with, I have been so fortunate to have opportunities, honestly, because I know that not everybody has opportunities or has the means to do that, but I've been really fortunate. Sometimes it's been for study, sometimes it's been through a connection I have with someone that invites me to go and visit their family in another country, or sometimes it's just been for fun. So I've traveled for different reasons to a variety of places, and I'm really, really thankful that I've gotten to do that.
So of all the countries you've traveled to, which one has been your favorite?
So I tend not to have favorites in general because I think every place offers something unique. Right now I'm going to say Uzbekistan because here, of course, right? Who doesn't like Uzbekistan? But, I would say the places that stand out for me are the places where I've gotten to spend a little more time in and get to know it more than just on the surface level. So for example, when I was in college, I studied abroad in Ecuador in South America. And I spent about 4 or 5 months there, and I lived with a host family. And that was the first time I spent a significant amount of time abroad. And because of that, Ecuador will always have such a special place in my heart because I got to know it so well. And I made connections there. Apart from all the amazing things it has just as a country, when you get to really know a place and especially the people, then it becomes, just a little more significant to you.
And something tells me you're not getting along well with your neighbors here in the city.
What
yeah.
tells you that?
Yeah, because I talked to a few of your students and they tell me that you and your neighbors don't get along well.
I actually don't know my neighbors.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm like, who's telling you these lies?
Yeah, probably not true. How about the culture and life here in the city? So what are some of your favorites in the city? Or what are some things you would point out as being great, something you love about the city? And while you're at it, you can talk about things you don't like.
I'll be careful with that. No, there's a lot to like here. And I think, this is for a lot of people similar. Going to the old city is always incredible. No matter how many times you've been there, for me, it's a place that I go and you just feel at peace. It's so beautiful. And so, and that ties in with something I like to do. I love to run. So I usually plan a running route so that I end up in the old city and I get to run through there and see the incredible architecture. So that's, a part of the city that I love. I love trying the food here. There's a lot of good restaurants. My students took me to Dilcor for the first time, and that was actually for Thanksgiving. So that place I always go back to, and and there's, like I said, many different restaurants I like. Something I like, very general, but it's easy to get to places and walk around. I really enjoy cities where you don't have to depend on a car, where you can have the freedom to walk out of your apartment and go anywhere. So that's something I really like about Bukhara. Something that I think everyone is not a fan of is the traffic and trying to cross the street. As a pedestrian, you always feel like your life is on the line, or at least I do. So,
yeah, like when I was in the U.S., I remember traffic lights have this button you can push, and it switches the light from green to red, so you can cross the road. Maybe this is something our city can do with.
Yeah, and
so pedestrians feel more safe walking around the city.
Exactly, and I'll add to that, because there's a crosswalk near where I live here, and you do press a button and the light turns red, and the cars still go through it sometimes, and I'm like, thank God I still looked both ways. Which, that happens everywhere, but it's just funny watching it here. So
yeah, right. So now, what do you say we talk a little more about education in general, and then education specifically here in Bukhara? Sure. So you've been here for 4 or 5 months now?
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah,
half a year.
as of yesterday.
So that means by now you have a pretty good idea how things work here, and as an experienced educator, so you can kind of make an observation and tell what's right and what's wrong. So I'd love to get into that as well in a bit. So
right.
Let's talk about teaching in general first. So what's your philosophy in the classroom? Yeah. I remember during our meetup, you said something interesting. You said, my job is to create a safe environment where everyone can just speak up and feel heard. So can you talk a little more about that as well?
Sure. And that connects with what I was saying earlier about my belief that every student is capable of learning, and that you have to, as a teacher, figure out what it is that motivates them or how they learn. And the starting place for that is creating that safe learning environment, which means that students are comfortable to feel themselves, are comfortable to be wrong, are comfortable to take chances, with their answers, or just feel like they're in a place, again, where it is, mentally, emotionally safe for them to be who they are. Because if you don't have that, you're not set up to learn. Like your brain literally can't process information if it's nervous, if it's stressed. And so for me, that's really my starting point.
So a cool question. If you spot a student in the classroom, they feel somewhat weird being there or nervous. So what is something you do to help them open up? What is something you do to ease attention?
That's a good question. Usually my first thought is to approach that student on an individual basis, to have a conversation, because hand in hand with creating that environment is also developing relationships with your students. And I tend to find that if a student knows that you are actually invested in who they are as a person and in their education, that can go a long way. So it might start with something as simple as going up, saying hello, checking in, acknowledging them as an individual, and, kind of letting them take the lead on that. Because you never want to push too hard, like I wouldn't approach them and say, hey, I noticed you're nervous, like that's not going to be helpful. But going up and again, checking in with them, seeing how their day is a starting point. And then you sort of, see how they respond and go from there.
So like have a small talk in the classroom, and that's completely fine.
Yeah. Or even as they're walking in the door, when your students are coming in, that's a great time to just do that casual check-in, say hello, say their name, that type of thing.
Yeah. And this is actually something I should be doing more often in the classroom, because we have so many students here and I just keep forgetting their name, and I know it gets on their nerves. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard.
There's so many of them.
I mean, I make my university students use name tags. Because, and I know it's silly, but it's like, I want to know, and I still forget sometimes. So sorry, guys. But yeah, I get it. I totally get it.
And I kind of feel like it's also hard to remember foreign names, especially Uzbek, Russian names.
I will admit, this was actually something that I felt really bad about last semester. Was by the end of the semester, I still did not know everyone's names. And you get to a point where it's too embarrassing to tell them you don't. I'm just like being really honest right now about this, because it really bothered me. And I felt like I'm not doing my job right if I don't know their names. But it was like you said, I felt like I was learning a new language just by learning those names, because they were words I had never heard before. So, and that's why this semester I'm trying to make a better effort of being more intentional about that.
Yeah. So if you ever need help with any of the names, you just let us know.
All right.
Yeah, sure. And what are some learning tools you use in the classroom? So do you often rely on textbooks or more tech stuff, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, where I currently am, we don't have like textbooks in the sense of every student has a textbook available, or there's not like an assigned textbook for the courses. So a lot of that is finding resources on your own. So I would say currently I don't rely on one source for what I'm using in the classroom. I'm trying to think of so I use a variety of texts and resources, and some online journals and articles. I often get for especially my methodology classes. We're a little limited on technology as well. So I'll be honest, I've had to be a little more creative, or just I've had to do things differently. That was a little bit of a learning curve coming here. And so what I would say is I actually do we use the words like manipulatives, which is like hands-on things to learn, including I do a lot of handouts. We do a lot of going to the board, writing things, kind of doing activities, with just more like very interactive, very hands-on, so that you feel like you're engaged in your learning both physically and mentally. So.
Yeah. And how do you feel about using ChatGPT in the classroom for language learning, which is something we do a lot here? So whether it's writing an essay or getting ready for, say, a speaking topic. So because with this new technology, AI, which has unlimited uses, a lot of uses, like I kind of feel like language learners are more efficient this way, like using technology, things like ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. So is it something you see yourself doing eventually in the classroom?
I will say it's a slippery slope. Uh-huh. I will say this first. I have used it for planning. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, and I haven't used it a ton. In my personal experience, it is a great starting point for ideas. So if I need, sample classroom situations or a sample lesson plan that I want to use with my students, it saves me a lot of time to just say, hey, can you give me 10 questions about blah, blah, blah? Instead of me either trying to create them on my own or go online. And then I can look at them and sort of rewrite some of them if I need to or reword them. So it is a great place to get ideas, to get motivation. I think the slippery slope is when you start to cross the line of, as a learner, using those ideas as your own. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I haven't done it as any type of in-class activity yet. I've used it just for me. Mm-hmm. And my hope would be that when teachers do allow their students to use it, and there's, so many like very, very current, like this is happening right now. Schools are figuring out how to do this, providing guidelines for students on how to use ChatGPT so you can get those starting points, ideas, or whatever, but then still making sure that this is your work and your ideas.
Yeah, this is something we should be wary of, cautious about its possible impact on our thinking abilities. Because if we let computers do all the thinking, mm-hmm. we're eventually going to lose the ability to do thinking for ourselves. Mm-hmm. Critical thinking, creative thinking, lateral thinking. I feel like all these abilities are at stake when there is too much technology involved. So, yeah. and yes, it's our responsibility as teachers to make sure that students make smart use of technology while being aware of its potential effect on their thinking abilities. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I agree, because you don't want to just say, no, don't use it, right? Mm-hmm. No one's going to not use it anymore. So it's mm-hmm. like, okay, it's here. How do we make sure, like you said, they're using it so it's, helping them to have, continue to think or whatever it might be. In the same way, if you're going to write an essay on something, maybe 10 years ago, you would have talked to a friend or talked to a parent, like, oh, I have this idea. What do you think? And then mm-hmm. through that conversation, you get ideas, but they're not writing it for you. That's sort of how you could use ChatGPT, is like that. Okay, I'm going to throw some ideas out there, see what mm-hmm. it has, and then, go from there. So it's a source, but not the thing that's doing the work.
Yeah. But sometimes students take it a step further and just tell ChatGPT to write it all into an essay.
Oh yeah.
And try to pass it as their own essay.
Yeah, and the thing is, many students, not all of them, don't realize how well teachers know student writing. And it's so clear when a student gives an essay that is not written by them, because mm-hmm. we know their level, especially as language teachers, we know their language capabilities. So they hand you an essay and it's full of words that they don't know. And you're like, You didn't
Yeah.
write this. So,
Or sometimes there are simply inconsistencies in their argumentation.
oh yeah.
Something
Yep.
doesn't add up.
Yes, all of those things. Yeah. So it's, and then it ends up just being a headache for everyone. So just don't do it.
Yeah, good point. So now I got another question I've been meaning to ask you. Have you ever taken any standardized test before, like TOEFL? I know it sounds super weird asking a native speaker if they have ever set an English test before, but this is something of interest to us. So have you ever tested anything like TOEFL or IELTS?
Yeah, no, not a language test, just because, as you said, there's, never would be a reason. I've taken standardized tests for other subjects, but not an English one.
But we can talk about language learning in general in more detail. So would you like to maybe share some quick tips on how to learn English? Say I'm an amateur, I'm just starting out, or maybe I have intermediate level English and I want to go to advanced or maybe eventually native like. So what are a few things I can do to improve my reading, listening, writing, speaking skills?
Yeah, and sometimes I think about how I learned Spanish, because that's, was the language that I learned. And I would say the things that really helped me were finding people to practice with, which means, people that you can actually try to have conversations with that aren't going to revert to your native language all the time. Or putting yourself in a situation where you truly can't depend on your native language. So you're forced a little bit more to use the language. So whatever that might look like, finding a speaking partner or, like a conversation club or something like that, where you're only speaking English and it forces you to kind of take it up a level, I think, speaking wise. And honestly, reading in English, well, I should say this, finding something you enjoy to read in English. Don't just read something for the sake of reading it, because then you're going to dread doing it. But when you read in a foreign language, you are getting exposed to so many words that you might not be exposed to through conversation. And if you're reading something you enjoy, then you'll be motivated to push past it a little bit if it is difficult. And when you read, you're also getting great examples of how sentences and thoughts are put together in that language. So it really does impact your speaking as well. So I would say those are two things that stand out to me as quick tips for learning.
Yeah, I really agree with the first point you made here about having someone you can practice your English with, or who gives you that necessary push, which is practically what I did 3 years ago. I was actually at that intermediate level I was talking about, and so what I basically did was I created the perfect English setup for myself, and I did that. But at the time, I didn't have the privilege of talking to natives or friends who would always speak English. So what I did was I would most of the time be listening to podcasts and English content on the internet as much as possible. So I had that exposure to language. And even though I was in the US, so some period of time, I feel like I learned more English here in Uzbekistan than I did when I was in the US. And a lot of it was because of that environment I built for myself. And this is something I try to get our students to do, like changing their phone settings to English, or always be listening to watching English content, or speaking in English strictly. Yeah. But the problem with that is it's really, really, really hard to stay disciplined, to stay consistent with it. You do it for a few days, and then you kind of feel like you're getting disconnected from your friends, your relatives, because you're not spending as much time talking to them, because then that means you have to switch back to your native language. So that's the trade-off here. So they may not be okay with that, so they might decide to give it up altogether. And so, yeah, this is one struggle I see with most language learners, being able to create that English setup for learning and be disciplined enough to stick to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really agree with the idea of you don't have to be in that foreign environment to learn as well. Like, because English is obviously phenomenal, and to hear you say that you learn more of it here speaks a lot to what you did. And for me, something that I always recommend, because going from 0 to 100 in terms of like, I haven't created that English environment and now I'm going to do all of these things, is a surefire way for people not to follow through. Most people. I think you are the exception. That is my perception. You might be a little of an exception in terms of your willingness or desire, whatever it was, to set that up and to stick with it. I think for a lot of people, and I think this goes for any skill you want to use, you create small habits. You start small. So, for example, you watch an English YouTube video every morning before you go to school. 10 minutes a day. Start there. Develop that habit. Because that's something that you can actually do and follow through, and it doesn't cost you anything. It costs you 10 minutes. You get into that habit. Okay, it's going well. You're improving your listening. All right, so I do that in the morning. And at night, now I'm going to read in English for 10 minutes at night. So it's adding those little things to your day where at least it's more than nothing, right? It's finding what works for you. And for me, the more I see that working and the more I find myself learning, the more encouraged I become to continue to add to that. And then maybe to progress to the point that you went to. But I think it's finding what works for you so that you can make it a habit.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, rather than make that one big shift, you make those gradual changes to your lifestyle, which will add up and then get you the result you want.
Yeah, exactly.
The result you're after. Yeah. And that's pretty interesting. Now, what do you say we move on to the next chapter of our podcast?
All right.
I would love to. I remember at our meetup, we talked about listening to podcasts versus university education. So you made the point that when you're at university, you get more education in detail, in depth. With podcasting, it's more flexible, but it doesn't give you as much detail. So do you see a future where people maybe use both for education? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and like looking back on that, it's just hard to compare because they're so different. A podcast is not a classroom, and a classroom's not a podcast. So they're just really different ways of getting information and interacting with information. And I think they're really sort of, for me, complementary. So for example, if you're taking an English literature class, and you're getting that classroom interaction, you're reading the things that you're assigned to read. But then on the side, you can listen to a podcast that's talking about books that you really enjoy or looks at literature from a different angle than you're looking at it in the classroom. I think they're a really nice complement to each other when you find those similar topics or whatever, and it can help you, in my experience, it's just helped to sort of round out the picture to what I'm learning and not like either taking over or replacing on one of them.
Do you use podcasts in your class?
No, we use it for like listening examples sometimes, but not as content. No, I've not done that. And if I was in a place where students had more time to listen to things outside of class, that would be a good consideration.
Yeah. So what is about podcasts you think would not make for a good classroom material? Is it the fact that they are not well structured sometimes? Is it the fact that sometimes there are too many extra details? or may not be as relevant to the class?
No, I mean, I think podcasts actually, the ones that I listen to actually go into a lot more depth than some classes do. Because there's so many podcasts out there. You can really find a wealth of information on so many things. It's more of the way that you're not interacting with a podcast, right? When you are in a classroom, you should be interacting with people, the materials, the content, whatever that is. It should be structured so that you are naturally learning. Some people are not auditory learners. Some people, could put a podcast on with the best intentions of listening to it and nothing, Yeah. There are people that just don't do well with that. And so those are people that you might find reading more or watching YouTube videos more because there's a different type of stimulation. So I think for a certain group of people, podcasts could be a great way to intake information, but it's just not for everybody.
Right. And you made a really good point about interaction, because people go to university not just to get education, but also to build connections, talk to people, reach out and get the necessary help, and learn more about the world, how things work. Yeah, there is this social aspect to getting university education, which is not something you can learn online by simply putting on your headphones and listening to podcasts.
Yeah. And I think we all learned that during the pandemic as well. We're all sitting at home and not having that social interaction, and you realize how much that is a part of your education. So that's an excellent point. Yeah.
So from this perspective, do you think it's possible, do you think that university education will never be replaced by online education? Or do you think we'll still have to go to school well into the future? Or is it something, because I have a feeling that no matter how great online learning tools or systems are, university education is here to stay, or school education, in-person education, because simply there is more to education than just getting information and retaining it and implementation. It's also about interaction. Yeah,
I've literally never considered that. But it's funny, you say things like that, like, oh, what would happen in the future if, it was all online? And my first thought is like, I really hope, my personal hope is that never happens, because of all the points that you just made. Of course, there is a potential universe where it does happen, and that to me sounds horrible, but
because we'd all be out of work.
Or like how just isolating and sad that sounds. And I just, I believe that the majority of people see the value in those in-person learning experiences that, like you said, will always be a core part of society and education.
Right. More on education. Since you've been working and teaching here for half a year now, what are some strengths and weaknesses of our local education you've noticed?
Well, something I say to my students is I see things as strengths and differences. I try not to compare so much because it's...
But objectively speaking, this is something that may, from your perspective, may not be as effective, so it needs to go.
Yeah. So I will say, the strengths. I always like to start with the things that are good. I do feel like, oh my gosh, especially the department that I work in at Bukhara State are extremely motivated, hardworking teachers who are really dedicated to what they do. So I get this strong sense of they see the value in what they're doing. They are, and as teachers here, they have to continue taking classes and learning. But I also see it in not just because they're required, but that intrinsic part that they see themselves as professionals and want to do a good job. So I have enjoyed being in that learning environment. And for me, keeps me motivated. Like, oh my gosh, I see how hard these people are working. Like I want to make sure I'm doing my best job too. So that's something I've appreciated. Something I have talked about with my students is there's a lot less flexibility here in many different ways. So for example, I was shocked when I found out that students stay with the same group of students throughout the university. And they were shocked when I said no one in the United States stays with the same group of students. And we were like, what? How does that work? And that was something that, in my professional opinion, I think there's a lot of drawbacks to that. I think there can be a lot of things that come from that take away a little bit from students' potential. So that's one thing that I observed. So there's not flexibility in choosing your course mates. There's not flexibility in choosing your classes. And when you think about students who are pursuing their career or really want to, university is a time to have a lot of growth. When you don't have a lot of choice in how that happens, sometimes I just wonder what the consequences, of that are. So it's definitely a stricter, less flexible system here that I would say leaves me wondering, what the outcomes of that are on a broader scale for education.
Yeah, so in your opinion, students are better off learning with different students every semester, not sticking the same group, which is actually something I had when I was in university, and I went to a different university, international university, and in every semester we would be in a different environment with different students, and I feel like that experience made me more adaptable and learn how to get along well with people from different perspectives, from different backgrounds, I mean. And this is something local universities can do with. This is something we should be working on. But I feel like the reason why this is not the case here is because it's simply harder to manage.
Yeah, I mean, logistically, sure. It's like, making class schedules. And I mean, I never would want to deal, with that. But, in my opinion, it's like, okay, there's a lot of reasons not to do something, right? But it doesn't mean it's not worth doing, And I am not here to change a system. I'm just giving my outside perspective on, again, I just think about the student experience and hearing what you said. I'm like, I want my students to have that exposure, to have different thoughts, to be around different people, or, something that I often worry about too is you start taking on certain roles within those groups, and then you get stuck there. Here's the quiet one, here's the smart one, here's the this, and if you don't get a chance to be with other people, then, those are just things that I worry about. I'm not saying that I've seen that or really talked about that, but those, again, I have a lot of wonderings about what the consequences of that are.
Yeah. Now I finally see it, like those students with great potential or who are really smart, they may not realize that there are smarter kids out there, if they're stuck with their own circle, right? So, and there's actually a quote that goes, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you should probably change the room,
right?
Or the people in the room.
Yes. Or vice versa, that student who has a lot of potential that people didn't see in the beginning, are they ever going to get that chance, if they're still with those same people and everybody's like, oh, they're not the smart one, maybe they are, we just don't know. So.
Yeah, and at the same time, being thrown into different environments every semester would make it difficult for a student to cope with their studies. like having to adjust to a different set of people or the classroom setting or the teachers. So if you think about, there are pros and cons on both of having a flexible routine or say system.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, it depends a lot on the system you grew up in. So for example, even the United States in what we call high school, you're with different people in different classes. So it's a very normal thing not to have the same people, even from first period to second period. And so again, it's almost an expectation, like, why would I have the same students in my class? And if you grow up that way, it becomes, like I say, just part of education, where I think you make a good point in terms of, if you're not used to it, it would certainly take some adjusting, or, there are students who really thrive on things always being the same, So, I think there's definitely pros and cons, and also, it depends on your background and experience.
Right. But I feel like flexibility and being adaptable is more important than ever in this ever-changing world. And so if they're not developing this quality early on at university or in high school, they're going to have a hard time when they grow up as an adult.
Yeah, because school should be a safe place to experience things before you're just out in a job or somewhere unfamiliar where you're experiencing them. So you're like, oh, that happened to me before. I was working with people I didn't know really well. And if it's in a classroom, then you're in a place where you can experience that safely. So yeah, definitely.
Sure. Yeah. So what do you say now we move on to our next chapter, where we talk a little more about your personal life, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
What do you find yourself doing when you're not teaching? So do you have any hobbies? Are you into reading? Blogging?
I'm glad you asked me that, because people here, this is just a difference. People here, it doesn't seem that they meet a lot of people who are unmarried, without children, living by themselves. So a question I always get is, aren't you bored? Like, what else would you do?
Yeah.
I do lots of things. And in fact, I find myself very busy. So most people know I love to run. And so that's something I do, that takes up a lot of my time outside of work. I do like to read, so I'm always reading. I usually have a book I'm reading for fun, and then a book I'm reading for professional development. Of course, I enjoy movies sometimes. But I love, even here, I love being out, and I love exploring new places. So especially when I first got here, I would choose like a different restaurant or part of the city. Like, all right, Saturday, I'm going to go there. I'm going to check it out. I'm going to explore, So it's always for me about finding new and different things to do, even if you're in the same place. And I spend a lot of time talking to my friends and family. So I usually try to set aside time to have conversations with my parents, or doing video calls with friends. So, among all of those things, I find myself, and work, of course, teaching takes time. So, I think I have a nice schedule. I'm not, going too crazy with being busy, but enough things that keep me busy, and honestly enjoying life. So,
So you said you're into running, right? So how long have you been doing this for?
I didn't start running until after I graduated university.
So what got you into running in the first place?
Well, this also connects with something I said about language learning, it was a running partner. Because I literally never thought I would run. I was the person who was like, who would run for fun? It looks horrible. And then I knew I needed some form of exercise. So I was like, okay, I'll start with like 10 minutes at a time. I'll do it. It'll be fine. And then I met a woman who I taught with, who I knew was an avid runner. Like she did marathons and things like that. And I don't know why, but I mentioned to her, I was like trying to get into running. And she was like, oh, well, if you want to, we should run together. How about like we meet up next Monday or whatever? And through running with her and realizing that I could do so much more than I was doing on my own, and having her encouragement, and she also made sure we were running every Monday, I not only got better, but I also grew to really love it. So it was kind of a, a small evolution of going from hating it to loving it.
So someone who's been running for quite a bit, what are some do's and don'ts for someone who wants to take up running?
I would say my number one is only do it if you really want to. I have a lot of people say to me like, oh yeah, I should run. I should, yeah, that's, I've been meaning to. I'm like, if you don't like it, don't do it. It's really painful. You want to always, when it comes to working out especially, you want to find something you enjoy doing, because then you look forward to it. So that would be my do, or my don't. Don't do it if you don't want. Don't force yourself. And then, for me, I love finding places that are nice to run in. So also like make it enjoyable. If you're going to do it, like, so for me personally, I hate treadmills. I don't like running on a track, because it feels just very boring to me. Some people love that. Some people can run on a treadmill all day, but find what works for you. Find those places that are inspiring to you, and that just having that motivation, or, visualizing yourself out on wherever it is a great way to keep yourself motivated.
Right. And I also heard somewhere that running on rough surface is hard on your knees and your ankle.
Yeah.
So something you should watch out for.
Yeah, like if you run on concrete sidewalks all the time, it's typically not the best, but sometimes you don't have a choice. So if you do have a choice, I know tracks are actually better for that because they're softer. You just have to listen to your body. Your knees start hurting, change it up a little bit. So.
And something else I wanted to ask is, do you listen to music while exercising?
It's a good question, because that's something that has also changed over time. When I started running, I listened to a lot of music because that was part of my motivation. Okay, I'll have this on, it'll be entertaining. And then when I started running longer distances, that still got boring after a while. And so I started listening to podcasts. And so it's turned into both my exercise and learning time a little bit, because, I'm not focusing on anything else except for running, and then I can listen. So usually I do kind of a combination of those things.
Right. I also, when I got into lifting weights, used to listen to a little bit of music, but then I heard somewhere, if you need music to stay motivated, but what are you going to do when the music is gone? And that's when I realized it was time to stop listening to music while working out and try to kind of summon up that motivation from inside, from within. So I don't normally listen to music when I'm working out. But as a starter, someone who just got into exercise, if you need a little bit of extra motivation, then you should. Right.
Yeah, I think it's a great
listening
point.
To music.
Whatever it takes to get you started. If it's something you want to do, like when I started, I told myself 10 minutes. Like, don't set these goals that are going to turn you off to it right away. If you need only 5 minutes and you need music that whole time, like whatever it takes to get started. And then as you get more into it, you'll realize you don't need to depend on those things as much, which is really amazing. And in fact, something that I'm shocked for myself is I often can go for long runs without anything now, because I use my, that time for other things in my head, but either way, I think it's good to, whatever it takes to, if it's a beautiful place or music or 5 minutes of trying it, just to get you out there, go for it.
And do you see yourself running a marathon one day?
I have run a marathon.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because I never thought I would. Like, that was something that I truly just ran because I loved it. Like, I didn't need to do a race. I didn't care about time. And then the longer I was running, I was like, it'd be nice to maybe set some goals. So I started with a half marathon and did a few of those, and those were great. And I was like, no way I need to do a full. This is enough. But then I got into my head and I was like, I feel like if I'm really a runner, which this is not true, like you don't need to do a marathon to be a runner. But I just decided at some point that I just wanted to check it off my list. So I ran my first and only marathon until now in the city of Richmond, Virginia, about 3 years ago now.
And how long was it?
I ran it in just under 4 hours, which was my goal, so I was really happy.
And how about the length of the distance? I mean,
oh, I'm sorry.
The
So they're all marathons. If you call it an official marathon, I think it's like, let's see, in American measurement, it's 26.2 miles, which I want to say is like 40 some kilometers. Yeah.
And you did it in 4 hours.
Yeah.
In one go.
Yeah.
That's mind blowing. Yeah. If I'm on a treadmill for longer than 15 minutes, I'm just gonna start gasping for air. You're gonna need an ambulance to get me out of there. And you ran 40 kilometers in one go. Just wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I mean, everybody, and because I decided it's what I wanted. I set a goal, and that's why I say you find what you want, what motivates you. And yeah, it was a huge accomplishment. It was something I never even thought I did. And then when I did it, it was just like, it was amazing. Yeah.
And do you take any supplements to optimize your health?
No, I just try to eat really healthy, honestly. I mean, when you're training for something like that, there's certain things that you build into your diet and stuff, but like on a daily basis, I'm very much about, natural foods. I'm not like a type of crazy diet, but like I enjoy eating healthy, eating balanced, and eating well.
So you're not doing anything like keto diet or something like carnivore diet? Because people in the US are crazy about their diet. They try different things.
They are. And I don't have anything against them. It's just not for me. And one of the reasons is I love to eat. I don't want to come to a place in Uzbekistan and say no to any kind of food, so I that's why I just try to have balance so that I can enjoy what people offer me. If people bring cake into school for their birthday, I can have a piece and be like, this is okay because I want to enjoy this.
Yeah. And I feel like when you travel to a lot of countries, you become somewhat of a foodie, right? Yeah. Once you try different types of cuisines, their dishes.
Exactly.
Yeah, you develop that appreciation for good food.
Yeah. And how much it's such a part of the culture. So, I'm glad that I can be open to that and say yes to everything. So. And
what's your favorite Uzbek dish?
Let me think. I think my go-to, I always say this, I love somsas. I know it's not a whole dish, but I do. I just love it. I love
you mentioned that. You did mention that.
Food that you can sit down and eat, food that you can take on the go. It's filled with different things. It's just fun.
Yeah. Sure. And what do you say we talk a little about your favorite podcasts as well? Because I remember you telling me that you've lately been into podcasts about leadership.
Yeah.
Right?
So that podcast, it's called Coaching for Leaders. And it's an interview podcast, which I find those easier to listen to for me. And they interview leaders from all different types of industries. And each episode has a different focus on a particular skill or situation that leaders face. And I have just learned so much. I find the conversations interesting. And honestly, even in education, there's so many skills that leaders use that, you can use because you're working with people. So I'm able to apply it, to what I'm doing. And, they'll even bring in, most of the people they have on the show have written books. So then I'll often buy the book that they talk about. So it's just been an amazing way for me to learn about leadership through that.
So in your mind, what do you think are some qualities of an excellent leader? What makes a person a good leader?
I think a lot of this goes back to what we were talking about previously in terms of knowing you're not the smartest person in the room. And actually, a lot of the leadership podcasts, I often listen for themes between them because that's what gives me a heads up as to several different leaders have talked about this one thing. And that one thing is often vulnerability, being able to say that you're wrong. No one wants a leader who thinks that they're right all the time. And another thing that many of them reference is knowing how to empower the people around them, knowing how to bring out the best, to see the best in people, to see what people's capabilities are, and to bring that out in them. And those are things that I'm always trying to work on myself and even think about in our classroom, so all of these things are just so transferable to whenever you are working with people.
Yeah. And I want to make a quick addition here. Another important quality I think a leader should possess is showing strength, mental resilience in difficult times and challenging times.
Yeah.
Right. Because a leader is someone you want to be able to count on in tough times. So if as a leader, you're not able to show that mental resilience and power your way through difficulties, then people not going to want to, I think, follow you. And I guess that's actually the main reason why we need leaders, because we need those people we can rely on in difficult times who can tell us everything is going to be okay and that they got it figured.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point in terms of there's a reason they're called a leader because people do look to them, and you have to have someone who is consistent. And, for me, I think going along with that, people, they look for someone who remains calm. So even if things do get crazy, they're not getting crazy. They're not responding in an over-the-top way. You really need someone who is going to keep their cool. And even if they don't have the answers or they don't know if it's going to be better, they're going to stay calm so that you have an example, to look at. Okay, they're under control, so I can be under control.
So how do you think people can develop that mentality of staying cool, composed in high intensity situations, high stakes situations?
That's a good question.
With me personally, what I do is something that's helped me a lot to keep my cool and stay, calm in difficult situation has been meditation. It's been so life-changing. Just being able to sit and try to tidy up your mind, your thoughts, because it's like a storm. And just sitting and having a moment of reflection in a quiet place can really clear things up for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think, side note, I think people need to spend a lot more time with their own mind to do just that. And I think that, because I can only give examples from what I do, and everybody is different, I think, how they can develop that. But similarly, I always give myself time to prepare myself before I'm going to be with people, especially if I am in some kind of situation that I am leading or talking. It's sort of how do I want to be perceived? How do I want to interact with people today? how do I prepare myself to be flexible because something's going to happen today that I'm not expecting. So a lot of it is that mentality, like getting yourself ready to know that, like almost predicting, like something's going to go wrong today, right? Yeah. And I have a choice in how I respond. So I think it's that combination of that mental reflection, that choosing who, how you want to be with others, as well as something I really have learned, and I think is another aspect of leadership, is knowing that you can only control yourself. Like you can't necessarily change the situation, but really in those moments when things aren't going how you want it to, or things get chaotic, making sure that at least like this is the one thing that I can control. And starting there. And I think that helps to navigate, how then you respond to the outside situation.
And do you think that this is something that should be part of every classroom or education? Students, aside from being taught information, they should also be taught a little bit of something in the way of leadership, in the way of staying composed and calm in difficult situations. Because I feel like this is something our education is missing.
Yeah, and I think it can start, at least in the United States, a lot of this, I don't know if you've used the word mindfulness, as you've like done your, research and learning around meditation. There are a lot of schools that are trying to implement mindfulness practices, which I think is a great starting point, because students need that space to think. Students need that time because their homes might be chaotic, classes are busy, there's so much going on, and it is such a skill, not only a skill, but a really a necessary part of life to be able to have that quiet kind of blank space and to know how to process your thoughts. So I think it's an incredibly important part that I do want to see more teachers. You spend 3 minutes at the beginning of class. Hey, let's have some like quiet time. Let's figure out how we're going to be in class today, set our intentions, whatever it is, to give students that like, let me just take a moment, I just came from the chaotic hallway and here so I totally agree. It should be more.
Right. That's been really interesting. Now, what do you say we talk a little more about you, Miss Kathleen? Would you like to tell us what your personal, philosophy is? This is like, we have this tradition here on this podcast, and we like to finish things off with a little bit of philosophy.
Oh.
Yeah. So.
Personal philosophy on life.
Yeah. So what's like at the core, at the center of your existence? What's your like moral compass, something that guides you in life? Or maybe your equation for happiness. Yeah. Or are those two different things?
That's a good question. Let me just I think, we've been focused so much on, professional growth and education. And I think I will say this, a lot of my philosophy on how I live is connected to a lot of the things that I already shared about learning, growth, motivation, setting goals, all of those things. Those are a huge part of what drive me as a person. I would say I'm a very driven person. And so part of my philosophy is always having something to work towards, always growing. Something we haven't talked about as much is sort of the personal side of that and relationships outside of school, outside of work. Relationships I have realized how integral they are to making all of those things happen. And so for me, I think my philosophy is really about carefully choosing where I spend my time, how I spend my time, and who I spend my time with, so that the people that I am giving my time to are people who want to see me succeed and, are willing to encourage me, but also people that, you need people in your life. You need connections, you need love, you need all of those things. So making sure that I kind of have a balance in all of those things, both the professional, the personal, and those relationships, which really, over time, I think I've come to realize more than ever how much those family and friend relationships are the things that have kind of kept me together and allow me to do the things that I do.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, it's about growth, constant growth, and making sure you are spending your time with the right people, the right place, and doing the right things. Yeah, that's quite an interesting philosophy, right? And another question I got here, and it might sound a little bizarre, but how does it feel to be your age? How does it feel to be your age?
Feels great.
Yeah.
I think it's a great question because I don't know, for me, the way that my life has gone, and people say like, oh, you should be happy, you should do what makes you happy. And I feel like every year as I've tried to live out that philosophy, I do find myself extremely happy. The older I get, the more that I learn, the more that I grow, so that I hope I always feel this way about my age. I hope I always feel like, wow, this is a great age to be, because I'm doing the things that I love to do. I'm spending time with the people that I love. And to me, that's the most important.
And if you had a time machine and could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you would give your, say, 16-year-old self?
I think it would be, so I don't know if, anyone would have guessed this, but I was extremely shy. Very, didn't like raising my hand in class, so unsure of what I had to say and all of those things. And I think I would have liked to encourage myself to take some more chances, to kind of speak up a little bit more or be okay making mistakes. I think some of the things I've learned now, just what it would have been nice to know or nice to feel encouraged back at that age.
Yeah, so to be more outgoing and open up.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say just, be outgoing, because you can't change who people are, but in terms of outgoing in terms of take a chance and raise your hand. You'll be okay. Take a chance and talk to that person. You'll be okay. It seems like a big thing in your head, but if you just do it once, you'll see it's not that bad.
Yeah.
So
just having that one moment of boldness.
Yes.
Can be life-changing.
Yes, it can. Yes, exactly.
Going up to the person you've been meaning to ask a question, or someone you want to talk to, but you don't have the courage to do it, just go for it.
I think that is well said. Yeah.
Don't think about it. It's almost 2 hours, I guess.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. we went over a lot of stuff today, and it's been so much fun talking to you today, and I really, really, really appreciate you coming on the show today. So do our viewers. So where can they find you on social media?
Yeah. So and thank you to you. Thank you again to my students. This has been a blast. This has been really fun. So I'm on Telegram. I'm on Instagram. I don't know if I can.
We're going to attach the links in the description box so people can find you on social media.
They can find me. I have a conversation club on Mondays if people want to come. Lots of ways to connect with me. So I will certainly share that information.
Sure. All right. It's been a blast. Like you said, it was so much fun talking to Miss Kathleen today, and hope you guys enjoyed our content too. So if you did, please don't forget the subscribe button, leave us thumbs up, and if you got any comments, leave them in the comment section below. And please let us know who you would like to see on the show next time. All right, guys, this is all for today. Peace. Wow.